Alright, welcome back to the Supercoach Enough channel. In this video we're going to do our round 5 preview for the 2025 NRL Supercoach season. So we'll just get into the players list to have a look at the most popular trade options. So I guess we'll kick off with the trade outs, and number one is no surprise, Tom Trbojevic out with knee injury, at least 4 weeks. So probably expect him to be back after their bye, which I think is around round 10 from memory. It'll say on here, round 9, there you go. But yeah, you can't hold that much money on your bench for that amount of time. So obvious trade out. Number 2, Jesse Arthurs. So I think, you could trade him out, absolutely. He has probably made most of his cash. You can see he's made 160k. There is a chance that if he has one more big game, he could jump up a bit more, but I'm definitely not for foreseeing that. So yeah, I think that's a fair trade out. Luke Metcalf, so I guess a few people getting off at this point that he's on the bye, but I don't think he's an urgent sell. His break even of 77, isn't ideal. He will lose a bit of the 50k that he's made. But realistically, I think there will be a bit of a run where the Warriors go good, and he'll be at the forefront of that. So I think that's one just to keep an eye on. I understand if you're upgrading to, say, Jaden Campbell's a very popular move. A few people using Metcalf to get back to Nathan Cleary. It probably does make sense if you are upgrading to a keeper, and especially if you've got that Tom Trbojevic money, it does make sense. So don't think he's an urgent sell, but can understand why 12,000 people are. Isaiah Iongi, so I guess a few people sort of probably looking at using Turbo's money and Iongi's money, and maybe going to a couple of fullbacks like a Pappenhausen and a Gutherson in that sort of mid or second sort of tier below the elite options. Yeah, I think with Iongi, I want him to make a little bit more than 84k. I think he can. It's very shades of Blaze Talangi last year, where people traded him out after a slow start and he got dropped, and then he came back in and he scored massive. I think that's going to happen, particularly when Mitchell Moses comes back. So I'm going to try and hold until then. Obviously, my team's not going that well, so I can understand why people wouldn't listen to that advice. But I think there's a bit more meat on the bone. We just need things to start going Para's way. Rob Toya, so one I think's got a bit more cash to make. Obviously, he hasn't had a couple of big weeks for a while, but he probably only needs one more big game, and his average and consequently his price will move upwards. So I think there's better options to sell than Rob Toya this week. Cobra Hetherington, I think, is one you can get out of. As you can see, he's lost money last week. His price isn't going anywhere. So yeah, if you've got the cash from Tom Trbojevic to upgrade Hetherington, I think that is a really smart trade. One I've already done myself. Jerome Luai out this week, been leaking cash. So I guess you do want to cut your losses at this point if you do have him. So that's fine. RTS, I guess a few people have been hoping he'd be back. Or I guess now just maybe with the cheapie available, are willing to make that downgrade now. So that makes sense. Adam Dewey's an interesting one. Named to play, whether he will or not, is very similar to the next man on the list, Jarrell Skelton. Was named the week after a hamstring injury and didn't make the cut in the end. So one to watch out for in final teams. So obviously have a backup plan if you need to reverse that trade. And Jarrell Skelton, he's probably the other one I am considering trading out in order to get the cheapie of the week. Haven't heard about when his hamstring is going to come good. He wasn't in the 22 this week. So I think he is one you can move on if you believe in the Arthur's pick, perhaps. The traded in list, so there'll be no surprise. Number one as well, Tom Jenkins. So 24% of all players bring him in this week. He's got the downgrade. The break even is fantastic. The job security looks pretty good. He's got a nice matchup this week. It ticks all of those boxes. So, like I said, there's plenty of options to bring in or to trade out for Jenkins in the centre wing. You could even potentially trade Tom Trbojevic to Jenkins in the flex. It's a bit crazy, but some people might be able to use that 600k elsewhere. Jaden Campbell at number two. So I started with this pick, so I am all for people bringing him in. I think he will be number one in the 5/8 position by the end of the year. So what a great time to get him in if you've got that Tom Trbojevic money in particular. Ryan Pappenhausen. So a bit of talk that he might kick goals this week. I don't know why. I don't think he's that much better of a goal kicker than Tyron Wishart. So I guess if Jerome Hughes is a late in, that will obviously then it will default to Pappy. And maybe a few people are banking on that too. So don't hate the pick. Bring in a fullback. As I said, I can see a few people pairing him with Gutherson, although Gutho's not that cheap anymore, as a way of getting a couple of guns in that position. Shibasaki's an interesting one. He's already made 175k, so if you're bringing him in now, you're doing so with the hope that he could get to 550k. I don't know if that's in the realm of possibility. He could potentially push 500, but I think last week was his spike game where you sort of bring him in hoping he has that game. You bank the cash, and then in a couple of weeks when he peaks, you can downgrade him. So I wouldn't be trading him in this week. Just an awkward price. Obviously, you've got Jenkins. Might be De Groot next week. We do have to have a second look at him. So I think, if you've got everything else set and you're happy, okay, yeah, take the bit of extra cash you'll make, but I don't think it's a long term play. Big Tino, so people bringing him in. He's already made one little jump in price, but I think under 600k still represents value. So if you want to bring him in, that is perfectly fine. Kalen Ponga, I think, is if you haven't got him, he is the obvious trade in for Tom Trbojevic. A lot of people traded out last week because of the buy. So just bring him back in. No harm, no foul. Not expecting miracles against the Dogs, given how good their defence has been. But if anyone can pull that defence apart, it is KP. Clint Gutherson, one I've actually toyed with bringing in, has a nice matchup this week, so could still, make another 150k. Be pushing up by 900k by then, and you could easily switch to any fullback or indeed any player in the game that you wanted. So, yeah, I don't know if he's a season-long keeper. He hasn't been in the past. But in saying that, it is a different circumstance now. He's at St. George, so who knows? But yeah, I don't begrudge anyone bringing him in, but I'm going elsewhere this week. Nathan Cleary, so I guess a lot of people, bringing him back after trading him out with the HIA. Could you wait a week potentially? But he could also go quite big against the Cowboys, who haven't been the strongest defensive unit this season. So as an owner, I can't begrudge people bringing him in, but I think if you haven't started with him, maybe you could wait another week and get him a bit cheaper. Nafahu White, so I guess still making lots of good money for owners. Um, you know, is I think bringing him in at that price is sort of awkward. I don't think he'll get to 650. He might make another 50 to 100k, but he probably doesn't have the ceiling to really push those big numbers. I guess the one argument for that is really vital is he's going to be a pretty handy number through the origin period. So we might talk a little bit more about that in a second. And Cam Munster. So I guess people using the the Metcalf trade perhaps to bring in Munster. Um, If you like him as a 5/8 keeper for the season, don't hate it. Um, I'm looking elsewhere in the 5/8 position, but that's just me. And again, I haven't been setting the world on fire this season, so take that for what it is. So I guess the other thing to look at is captaincy choices. Oops. Yep, there we go. I think this is still set to all coaches. We might have a look at filtering that in the coming weeks to start separating the cream from the rest. But let's see, most popular captaincy shout this week, Payne Haas. I mean, the bloke's averaging 106. I don't think he'll. I don't know if he'll score 106, but he definitely won't score that much lower. And particularly for people like me who got burnt by the turbo captaincy last week and maybe Cleary the week before, these safe options are looking super viable going forward. So, Payne Haas, if you don't own Payne Haas, maybe you've got a Terrell May. I have them in the same sort of captaincy conversation, albeit not everyone else does. Terrell May, super pod captain at 2.6. Kalen Ponga, so I guess playing in the last game of the round is always a good time to play. Your captain gives you the most VC flexibility. But he is up against the Dogs, who have been good defensively this year. So interesting. I know the Dogs played the Gold Coast Titans off the bye. I don't know if that's a bit of a pattern, but if you like Ponga as a pick, you think the Dogs are due a loss, which hey they haven't had one yet, so they could be. As a Dogs fan, I hope they don't start losing this week. But yeah, can totally understand. Nathan Cleary, I think you can see the higher VC number. I think that's more relevant. But some people do like to lock their captain away nice and early in the week. So I think he's as good a chance as any of having that big boom game this week, given, again, the Cowboys haven't been spectacular defensively. The Raiders scored 20 points and probably should have scored another try there with, was it Savage, I think, bombed an absolute, locked in try to young Paddy. So there's definitely opportunities there. So I think Cleary should be definitely in the captaincy conversation, but probably more of a VC. Clint Gutherson against his old team that basically said they don't want him could go massive. So I understand if you're an owner why you would consider him. Perhaps again not convinced on the ceiling, but I guess if he is a prized piece in your squad, perhaps you could run it. Ruben Garrick, so maybe a few people living in the past, or a few people like me, had him as the captain for Parramatta and just haven't changed it yet. But against Melbourne, I would not be risking that. Tom Trbojevic, I think the 2.7% left are the people like me that just haven't made the adjustment yet. So yeah, get rid of him. Not as captain for sure. Terrell May, as I said, I do like as a solid, safe captain option if you've got that higher upside VC. Um, don't know if he'll play 80 minutes this week. It was that late injury to Dewey sort of shuffled their bench. They didn't have a third middle forward and sort of had to play 80 out of necessity. But I think he'll still play 60 and, score up 70 is what I'm predicting, which, as a captaincy backup option is fine. Nico Hines, if you've got him, you might as well have a pop at, again, probably VC in the first game would be nice. But if you just want to captain him and forget it, that's all good too. And Reece Walsh, this is a pretty brave call given his form. He's only averaging 54, but he is very much rocks and diamonds. So if he hits a diamond this week, you'll be absolutely cheering. In the VC conversation, we'll filter out players we have discussed already, which is basically the first 5, 6, 7, 8. So probably the two in the top 10, Big Tino and Cam Munster. Tino against the Dolphins could go pretty big. They're not the most fearsome forward pack there at the Dolphins, so he could have a bit of joy through the middle. And Cam Munster, I guess if you've got him in your team, he is always a chance of a big score. That perfect upside VC option. Shout out to Fanua Blake if you've got him. Um, I don't know, he's not in that many teams, 20.9%, so a fair amount of teams. So 10% of the owners are VCing him this week, which is, fair option in that first game. So to my trades this week. So probably not too far removed from the norm. Um, I am probably going to trade out Arthur's. I'll take his 150k gladly. And if we go by break evens, we'll bring in Tommy Jenkins. Let's go back to the round 4 summary for the second trade. So, obvious trade, Tom Trbojevic out. And so, in the flex, you can obviously do whatever you want, but I'm just going to move Callum Ponga out because I am trading in a fullback. But I am going a bit different. I'm going James Tedesco. All right. So obviously at 850k, I am probably paying a bit more than what I could if I wait a couple of weeks. But the reality is, he's probably going to end up in my top 3 fullbacks at the end of the season. Um, you're assuming with Dylan Edwards coming back soon that he's probably still not in the frame for Origin. I can't imagine, even though they've changed the coach, they won't want to change the winning formula too much. And the other thing, I suppose, with him is he does have the really great buys. So these Roosters assets, so I've got Toya, I've got Nafahu White, I've got Sandon Smith, although I may move Sandon Smith on beforehand. But now having Tedesco as well. These guys will cover all of the 6 buy rounds when there's multiple teams on buy. So the big buy rounds, when it is only best 13 on field, but also those rounds where there's 3 teams on buy the week after Origin, it is best 17. Right, and the Roosters do cover all 3 of those as well. So, these sort of assets like Tedesco, I think, are going to be super handy through the Origin period. You don't have to go full buy plan mode at this point in time, but particularly for someone like me, who has sort of started or is starting from a very low base, we do have to go a little bit different. If we just follow the crowd, we're not going to make those jumps. It's not to say these moves might not work out. And then, we're no different to where we started from. We're still way off the pace. So, his ownership is ridiculously low, 4% of teams for what we know he's capable of. And people might say, well, he's got a tough run coming up. The Broncos and the Panthers after this. I'm not convinced the Panthers are as strong as what they have been in the past. The Broncos, sure, at Suncorp on Friday night, they're tough, but he scored 112 points off from last year. And then you can see against Souths last year, he blew up in both games. It's always a big rivalry match. So, not scared of the draw. After that, the Dragons and the Dolphins aren't the worst. Sure, he does have the bye into the Bulldogs and Sharks afterwards. But you can even see his average against these teams. He's played enough games now. 75, 75. Admittedly, 60 is low, but I think he can outpace that this time around. 85. 55 against the Dolphins is an anomaly. I reckon he'll score his highest score against the Dolphins. The Bulldogs, I think he won't get 87, but we can hold him for that. Into the Sharks and Raiders through Origin. So I think he'll score well. And then, he does have a couple of other buys, but they also are in weeks where we can cover him. So, I think he is a must-have during the Origin period. So I'm just going to go against the grain and go early on that pick. All right. So obviously a lot of people are going to go for Guthersons, Pappenhausens, maybe a few go on Latrell. I don't know in the centres if that's a smart move. I guess if he's in the flex, you could even go with like a Nico Hines. You could get a Payne Haas if you haven't got him. That's a great move. But coming from 70k, I need to do something a bit different. So I'm bringing in Teddy. So let's lock in those trades. Um, and then, it doesn't really matter where we position those guys. I might just move Tedesco in the flex because he does play a bit earlier in the round. Um, so what we're going to do is bring Cleary on field. He's going to be the vice captain this week. Into super safe, Payne Haas as captain. And then I think I set the rest of this up in the preview video. So I think I had different trades. I think I had Lehigh Hopewadi. Got talked out of him just because the draw isn't the best for Manly. But also, he actually scores better on the wing than at fullback, which I thought was interesting. Um, so Horsburgh comes on field for Gilbert. So we remove him as a reserve. Metcalf can't be a reserve this week, and neither can Skelton. So realistically, I think Humphreys needs to play. Marzu definitely against the Dogs, but being the last game of the round, he can sit on the bench. Ponga for sure. Although that does mean we're playing Yongi. And I'll be honest, I'm okay with playing Yongi this week. The fourth reserve is going to be Shibasaki because I think they do play fairly late Saturday night. So against the Tigers, I'll back him in to do a bit and hopefully score a try. But yeah, so the alternatives to playing Yongi this week, Hubner, safe but no upside. Finifuiaki has a bit of upside but hasn't really shown it yet, so not trusting. So it basically comes down to Yongi or Sandon Smith. And against Souths, I think there is a bit of joy down that left edge. Would more importantly down the right edge of the Rabbitohs defence. Jack Whiten will move across, so I think that might make it a bit more solid. But I'm not too sure how that's going to go. So it is a toss-up between Yongi and Sandon Smith. And as I said, I think, Yongi's not that far away from a breakout. They're at Combank. It is a Saturday afternoon. I should probably check the weather. The weather might be a bit of a factor. If it's going to rain, maybe Sandon Smith is a slightly safer option with that defence. Or even Hubner, just a defensive workhorse sort of guy. So I might actually have to have a bit of a look at the weather to lock in that last reserve. But that's basically how the squad's going to line up. The trades are pretty well confirmed. Not using a boost this week. Even to Tedesco, I wasn't 100% sold, but I've had to talk myself into it as basically I want him through the origin period. So I'm just going to get him now. But yeah, I wasn't convinced by Hopewadi after few comments and watching a few other YouTubers and the like. Not convinced by Gutherson or Pappenhausen or Walsh. I toyed with Nico Hines, but again, I think I can just trade Humphreys in a couple of weeks and just put him straight in the halfback spot. So I think Tedesco is the option for me, and hopefully it creates a bit of a point of difference for my team. But yeah, last reserve may change, so we'll talk about that on Monday. But we'll wrap the video up there. So as always, if you've got any questions, comments, thoughts, feel free to add them below this video. Give us a like if you enjoy the NRL Supercoach content. Subscribe if you enjoy all of the fantasy content on the channel and want to follow more of it. And other than that, we'll catch you in the next one.